The obsidian floor of the antechamber of final recourse was a mirror of polished night, reflecting the cold, distant starlight that filtered through the chamber's single, vast crystalline ceiling. Upon this stardusted darkness stood Grand Marshal Vorlag, his armored form a monolith of etched alloys and ceremonial grav plates. He was the clenched fist of the Cathar Imperium, the final instrument of its will, and for the first time in his decorated existence, the fist hesitated. Before him, elevated on a dais of unadorned stone that seemed to drink the very light from the chamber, sat the silent council. They were shadows, indistinct figures cloaked in robes woven from solidified vacuum, their faces obscured by the perpetual twilight that was their tradition and their shield. They did not speak, for their thoughts were a unified chorus that resonated directly within the minds of those granted audience, a pressure of pure, cold logic that had guided the Imperium for millennia. And today, that pressure was focused entirely on Vorlag, a weight that threatened to crack even his battle-hardened psyche. The subject of their silent, crushing deliberation was a nascent species, a flicker of chaotic potential in a forgotten spiral arm of the galaxy, a species that called itself human. The data streams had been a source of morbid fascination for the Imperium's xenologists for cycles. They were a torrent of unstructured, contradictory noise, a planetary scream of art and war, of love and hate, of philosophy and base instinct. It was the broadcast signature of a species at war with itself, a civilization on the very precipice of self-annihilation. The Cathar, a species that had achieved unity through the surgical excision of all such chaotic impulses eons ago, watched with a mixture of pity and revulsion. They were a cautionary tale, a cosmic footnote in the grand, ordered library of galactic life. Then the noise had stopped. Not gradually, not with a whimper, but with an abrupt, absolute finality. The torrent of transmissions, the planetary scream, ceased in an instant. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the chaos it replaced. The Imperium's deepest, most ancient protocols stirred. A chaotic species on the verge of either implosion or explosion was a known variable. A chaotic species that suddenly learned the discipline of silence was an unknown, and the Imperium did not tolerate unknowns. It was a potential infection, a mimetic plague that could unravel the perfect, sterile order they had spent ages cultivating. So the Armada had been gathered. Not a fleet, not a task force, but an Armada. A force of such overwhelming scale and power that its assembly had darkened the skies of a dozen star systems and caused gravitational ripples that would be felt across the galactic core. It was the Imperium's ultimate statement, the physical manifestation of its intolerance for existential threats. It now hung in the void, a swarm of metallic predators poised at the edge of the target system, awaiting a single final command. And it was this command that the Silent Council now pressed upon Vorlag's mind. The weight of their expectation was immense, a demand for action, for the cauterizing of this potential wound upon the fabric of galactic stability. Yet, a sliver of doubt, a concept so alien to Vorlag's being that it felt like a physical shard of ice in his mind, had taken root. He had reviewed the final data intercepts himself, the last chaotic whispers before the great silence. There were images of immense destructive power, yes, mushrooming clouds of fire and radiation that spoke of a species that had weaponized the very atom. But there were other things the tactical analysts had dismissed as irrelevant noise. There were patterns of pure mathematics woven into musical compositions, philosophical treatises on the nature of consciousness transmitted alongside crude entertainment narratives, and images of breathtaking, impossible beauty, both natural and created. It was a storm of a billion contradictory ideas, and Vorlag, a being of singular purpose, could not reconcile the species that created such elegant proofs of cosmic order with the one that threatened to burn its own world to a cinder. The pressure from the Council intensified, a silent demand for acknowledgement, for the final word that would unleash oblivion. He adjusted his stance on the cold obsidian, the grav plates in his armor humming with a low, resonant thrum. He was a warrior, not a philosopher, yet the silence from that distant world seemed to demand a philosophical answer. Was it the silence of the grave, or the silence of profound, terrifying self-control? The Imperium's doctrine was clear. When faced with an equation that cannot be solved, eliminate the variables. It was the logic that had carved their empire from the chaos of 1,000 lesser species, the principle that guaranteed their continued existence. To deviate was to invite. Dissolution. He had given the order to assemble the Armada based on this very logic. He had watched as world breakers and sun killers were drawn from their silent orbits, their crews awakened from cold stasis. their engines kindled with the fire of captive singularities. The entire weight of the Imperium's military might was now balanced on the tip of his will, a spear aimed at the heart of a world he did not understand. From the periphery of the dais, a single figure stirred, a subtle shift in the fabric of shadow. It was Xylos, the philosopher-strategist, a member of the council whose role was not to embrace the cold logic of the Imperium, but to question it, to seek the flaws in its perfect, crystalline reasoning. Xylos's thoughts were not a part of the unified chorus, but a separate, distinct thread, a countermelody of inquiry that was both tolerated and feared. Grand Marshal, the thought of Xylos entered Vorlag's mind, a quiet intrusion into the crushing pressure of the others. You have studied the final transmissions. The tactical reports speak of a species armed with primitive fission devices, a threat to be managed, not feared. Yet an armada of this scale has been convened. It suggests the Council perceives a threat beyond the physical. What is it that you, the commander of this force, truly fear? Vorlag focused his gaze on the indistinct shadow of Xylos, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the Council's unified will. He projected his own thoughts, carefully shaping them into the formal, structured patterns of high-level discourse. Philosopher-strategist, I fear the unknown. I fear the silence. Their chaos was a language we could, in our way, comprehend. It spoke of predictable paths, self-destruction, a slow decline into barbarism, or a violent outward expansion that we would inevitably contain. But this sudden, coordinated silence across an entire planet, it suggests a unity of purpose we did not believe them capable of achieving. If a species can unify its discordant will in a single moment, what else is it capable of? What manner of weapon or idea could be born from such a transformation? The unified thought of the Council pulsed again, sharp and impatient. The variable is too great. The potential for a mimetic contagion is unacceptable. The protocol is clear. Cauterize, cleanse, continue. Their logic was flawless, a fortress of reason built over millennia of survival. The Imperium had not endured by taking chances, by indulging in philosophical speculation about lesser species. It had endured by being the unmovable object, the final arbiter of order. But the doubt in Vorlag's mind was not so easily expunged. He had seen the images of their art. He had felt the echoes of their music, a strange, resonant frequency that seemed to stir ancient, dormant emotions within his own genetically suppressed consciousness. It was the expression of a species that felt everything, all at once, without filter or shame. They embraced the chaos that the Cathar had so meticulously purged from their own genome. And in that embrace, they had found a power that the Imperium, for all its might, could not comprehend. Was it a power that led to their destruction or to their ascension? The silence held the answer, and he was being ordered to destroy it before it could be heard. Xylos's thought returned, a calm ripple in the turbulent psychic waters of the chamber. The Armada has a fail-safe Grand Marshal, a final protocol born of the Imperium's deep-seated paranoia, the deletion date. A preordained moment in time, logged into the Armada's core programming before its departure. If the primary objective, the pacification of Sol 3, is not achieved by that date, the entire mission directive is irrevocably erased from every ship, every drone, every weapon system. The command structure is dissolved, the mission logs wiped clean. The Armada ceases to be an army and becomes just a collection of ships, its memory of purpose gone. It is a protocol to prevent a rogue fleet from acting on outdated intelligence, a final guard against the chaos of independent command. Vorlag knew the protocol well. It was a testament to the Imperium's deepest fear, that its own instruments of order could become agents of chaos. The deletion date for this mission was set. It gave him a finite window, a non-negotiable deadline for the annihilation of a world. The date is generous, Vorlag projected, his thoughts a grim acceptance of the inevitable. It allows for a meticulous, systematic cleansing. There will be no possibility of failure. The Council's pressure eased, a silent, cold approval. They had their answer. The instrument of their will was sharp and ready. But as Vorlag offered a formal, disciplined salute, turning to leave the stardusted chamber and issue the command that would extinguish a sun, the final, lingering thought of Xylos followed him like a ghost. But what if the silence is not the prelude to war, Grand Marshal? What if? The silence is the destination. What if this species did not fall into the abyss but learned to fly? You are taking an armada built to shatter worlds to a place that may no longer have a world to shatter but a consciousness to confront. And I fear our weapons are not suited for such an engagement. Vorlag strode from the chamber, the weight of 1,000 suns in his armored soul, the philosopher's question echoing in the vast, silent emptiness of his own mind. He was a creature of certainty, of action, of overwhelming force. and he was about to point the entirety of his civilization's power at a question he could not answer. The transition from hyperspace was not a violent tearing of reality, but a silent, seamless unfolding. One moment, the Armada was a river of compressed spacetime, a torrent of impossibly vast energies flowing between the stars. The next, it was manifest reality, a breathtaking tapestry of dark metal and cold light spread across the outer reaches of the target system. Vorlag stood on the command bridge of the indomitable Will. His flagship, a vessel so immense its internal gravity was a carefully managed celestial body in its own right. The forward view screen was not a screen at all, but a perfect, unfiltered projection of the space before them, a window into the void. And the void was full. Swarms of strike craft, sleek obsidian blades, held formation around titanic battle cruisers. World breakers, their prows housing the caged energies of neutron stars, drifted with a terrifying, patient grace. The sheer, overwhelming presence of the Cathar Imperium had arrived, a final, unanswerable statement of power. The system before them was quiet. A yellow, unremarkable star at its center, orbited by a collection of rocky and gaseous planets, all conforming to predictable astrophysical models. The target, the third planet, glowed with a soft, blue-white light marbled with clouds. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. The bridge was a cathedral of controlled silence. Cathar crew, their movements precise and economical, manned stations that glowed with the cool, blue light of advanced sensor displays. Every instrument of perception the Armada possessed was focused on that single, silent world. Vorlag felt the reports cascading into his mind, a torrent of data from 1,000 different sources. There were no orbital defenses, no weapon platforms, no fleet, no matter how primitive, rising to meet them. The planet's upper atmosphere was clean, devoid of the metallic debris and energy signatures that should have marked the presence of a fledgling spacefaring race. The cacophony of radio and electromagnetic transmissions that had so alarmed the Imperium was gone. It had not been replaced by the focused, encrypted signals of a world preparing for war, but by nothing. A deep, profound, and unnerving quiet. "Status of planetary energy grid," Vorlag commanded, his voice a low bass rumble, the first sound to break the bridge's disciplined hush. His first officer, a tall, severe Cathar named Malakar, responded without turning from his console, his own thoughts projected with crisp formality. "Energy readings are anomalous, Grand Marshal. There are signatures consistent with a global civilization. We detect heat, light, the biospheric activity of billions of life forms. But there are no centralized power sources, no fission reactions, no fusion plants, no geothermal taps. The energy is diffuse. It seems to emanate from the planet itself, from the very fabric of its ecosystem, yet it follows no known laws of physics." Vorlag processed the information, the shard of ice in his mind growing colder. This was not the signature of a primitive species that had bombed itself back into the Stone Age. This was something else entirely. This was wrong. The plan had been simple, a three-phase operation of brutal efficiency. Phase 1, the systematic annihilation of all orbital assets. Phase 2, a targeted kinetic and energy bombardment to neutralize all major population and industrial centers. Phase 3, the deployment of ground forces to pacify any remaining resistance and sterilize the planet of its native intelligent life. It was a strategy they had perfected over centuries of conquest. But it was a strategy predicated on the existence of a target. Grand Marshal, the thought from Xylos, who was observing from a specialized meditation chamber deep within the flagship, echoed in his mind. The philosopher-strategist had insisted on accompanying the Armada, a decision the Council had reluctantly sanctioned. Perhaps the war we anticipated has already been fought, and lost, or won. Vorlag ignored the insinuation. He would proceed by the doctrine. If there were no orbital targets, Phase 1 was complete by default. He would move to Phase 2. "Target the largest energy concentrations on the surface," Vorlag commanded. "Prepare for a warning strike, a single kinetic rod, low yield on the largest uninhabited landmass. Tia, see if they are still capable of a response." Malakar's hands moved over his console, his touch precise. A targeting reticle appeared on the main view screen, settling on a vast desert continent. A weapon port opened on the underside of the indomitable Will, a circle of absolute blackness against the ship's gray hull. A projectile, a simple rod of hyperdense alloy, was released. It did not burn or glow. It was a needle of pure kinetic potential, falling towards the blue planet with inexorable, silent speed. They watched its descent. The entire bridge crew, beings conditioned for millennia to suppress all outward emotion, were united in a state of profound, silent anticipation. The rod entered the atmosphere, a streak of incandescent fire. It struck the desert, and the impact was nothing. There was no cataclysmic explosion, no seismic shockwave spreading across the continent, no mushroom cloud of vaporized Earth. The sensor readings were impossible. The rod, an object with enough kinetic energy to shatter a small moon, had simply vanished. It had struck the planet's surface and ceased to exist. Its energy, its mass, its very presence in the universe was gone. Malachar turned from his console, his usually stoic face a mask of disbelief. Grand Marshal, the object is gone. All energy, all matter, neutralized at the moment of impact. The planet's surface at the target point is unchanged. The sand is not even scorched. The silence on the bridge was now of a different quality. It was no longer the silence of discipline, but the silence of awe, of a dawning, terrible fear. An entire planet should not be able to absorb such an impact. It defied the laws of physics. It was as if they had thrown a rock into the ocean, and the ocean had not splashed, but had simply erased the rock from existence. Vorlag felt a cold dread coalesce in his gut. This was not a primitive world. This was not a dead world. This was something else. This was a trap. Not a trap of minds and energy fields, but a trap for the mind, a puzzle designed to shatter their certainty. He had brought the greatest armada in the history of his people to lay siege to a ghost, a phantom that followed rules he could not comprehend. Xylos was right, he thought, the admission a bitter pill. Our weapons are not suited for this engagement. Before he could issue a new command, a new order to retreat or to unleash the full world-breaking power of the fleet in a desperate final gamble, a new signal appeared. It was not a radio wave. It was not a laser. It was a gentle, impossibly complex modulation of the gravitational field, originating from the planet below. It was a form of communication so advanced that the Cathar's most sophisticated sensors could barely resolve it. Their translation engines, designed to decrypt the languages of 1,000 species, struggled for a moment and then fell silent, overwhelmed. And then the message came through, translated not by their machines, but directly, a concept implanted with surgical precision into the mind of every Cathar in the Armada. It was a single, simple, and utterly terrifying thought. Welcome. We have been waiting. The voice was not a voice. It was a presence, a consciousness that filled the void between their ships, a calm, vast intelligence that felt as ancient and as patient as the stars themselves. On the main view screen of the indomitable will, the image of the blue planet shimmered. A figure began to coalesce, not on the planet, but in the space before them, a projection of pure information given visual form. It was humanoid, a simple, unadorned silhouette of light, neither male nor female, with no distinguishing features. It simply was. It stood in the vacuum of space, dwarfing their largest battleships, yet it felt intimate, as if it were standing on the bridge beside each and every one of them. The collected might of the Cathar Imperium, an armada that had crushed civilizations and extinguished suns, was held in a state of absolute paralyzed shock. Every weapon was silent. Every engine was still. They were a fleet of statues in a sea of stars, facing a god. Vorlag found he could not move. His body, trained for a lifetime of command and conflict, was locked in place, not by an external force, but by the sheer, overwhelming weight of the moment. This was the source of the silence. This was what the chaos had become. The human entity, if that is what it was, radiated an aura of profound, unshakable tranquility. There was no malice, no anger, no fear, only a vast, patient, and all-encompassing awareness. You have come a long way, the presence communicated, its thoughts flowing like a calm river into their minds. You have come bearing weapons, expecting a conflict. We understand. Your history has taught you that growth and expansion are achieved through force. It is a common, though painful, stage in the development of a species. The simplicity and truth of the statement disarmed Vorlag, more effect. Lively than any weapon could have. The entity was not speaking down to them. It was not judging them. It was diagnosing them as a physician might diagnose a patient with a familiar, well-documented illness. Who are you? Vorlag forced the words out, his voice hoarse, the sound alien and crude in the face of this silent, mental communion. We are what humanity became, the being of light replied. The chaos you monitored was the sound of our becoming. It was the friction of a billion individual minds striving, fighting, loving, and hating their way towards a single, unified consciousness. We did not destroy ourselves. We integrated. We shed our individual biological shells and the conflicts they engendered and became one. The silence you detected was the moment of our birth. Malachar, his composure finally breaking, stumbled back from his console. Impossible, such a transition, a species-wide singularity. It is a theoretical myth. The entity's presence seemed to focus on the first officer, its light softening with something that felt like compassion. It is not a myth. It is simply the next step. a step your own species chose to avoid. You achieved unity by purging your chaos. We achieved it by embracing it, by understanding every facet of it, and then weaving it into a single, cohesive whole. Our art, our wars, our philosophies, they were not contradictions. They were the threads of the tapestry we have become. Vorlag looked at the peaceful blue world hanging in the void. He had come to conquer a planet, but the inhabitants had already left, not by fleeing into space, but by ascending to a different plane of existence entirely. The planet was no longer a home. It was a monument, a cradle now empty but preserved with loving care. The kinetic rod they had fired, it had not been destroyed by a shield. It had been unmade. The unified consciousness of humanity had simply willed it out of existence, a minor and effortless correction to the fabric of reality. Why? Vorlag asked, his question a plea for understanding. Why did you wait? Why allow us to come this far? You could have destroyed us at any point on our journey. The figure of light shimmered, and for a moment Vorlag felt an echo of the chaos that had been, a fleeting sense of a billion voices and memories all harmonized into one. Because destruction is your tool, not ours. We monitored your approach. We have been monitoring your civilization for longer than you can imagine, sifting through the faint, leaking transmissions of your empire as they crossed the void. We understood your doctrines, your protocols, your fears. And we understood that you could not be convinced by words or threats. You had to see. You had to arrive here and face an answer that your weapons could not provide. The entity paused, and the full crushing weight of the reveal settled upon the Armada. We also understood your fail-safe, the deletion date, a most Cathar solution, a rigid, fear-based protocol designed to protect you from the consequences of your own actions. We knew that if we simply waited, if we simply allowed you to arrive and witness the truth, your own system would disarm you before you could make a choice you would later regret. The realization struck Vorlag with the force of a physical blow. They had been outmaneuvered not by superior technology or tactics, but by a superior understanding of their own psychology. Humanity had not prepared a defense. They had prepared a lesson. They had used the Cathar's own paranoia, their own rigid adherence to protocol, as the instrument of their own defeat. He looked at the mission chronometer on the main display. He had been so focused on the entity, on the impossible reality before him, that he had not noticed the passage of time. The final digits were counting down, the deletion date, the preordained moment when the Armada's purpose would be erased. It was a handful of seconds away. He could still give the order. He could still command the fleet to fire, to unleash the world breakers and sun killers in a final, apocalyptic spasm of defiance. It would be a meaningless gesture. They would likely be erased from existence before their own weapons could even reach their target. But it would be an act of will, a refusal to be so passively taught. He looked at the serene figure of light. It was not threatening them. It was not gloating. It was simply waiting patiently for them to complete a journey they had begun themselves. It was giving them the dignity of their own process, however flawed. The final second ticked away. And then a chime, soft and melodic, echoed through the bridge. It was a system notification he had never heard before. On his command console, a single line of text appeared in the formal Cathar script. It read, Mission Directive SO3 Pacification deleted. All related mission logs, targeting data, and command protocols expunged. Armada command structure dissolved. Awaiting new orders. A collective gasp, a psychic exhalation of shock and disbelief, rippled through the minds of the crew. They were adrift, an army without a war, a fist unclenched. The Armada of the stars that came for Earth had been deleted before its date, with destiny rendered impotent not by a shield or a weapon, but by a deadline. The days that followed were a period of profound and unsettling stillness for the former Armada. Their ships, once instruments of a singular, terrifying will, now drifted in the silent space of the Sol system, a flock of predators suddenly without the instinct to hunt. Grand Marshal Vorlag had confined himself to his quarters, the weight of his irrelevance a physical burden. He was a commander without a command, a warrior without a war. The Imperium's entire military philosophy, a doctrine of overwhelming force and proactive annihilation, had been proven not just wrong but naive. They were children playing with sharp rocks, and they had just been shown what it was to be an adult. It was Xylos who finally breached his isolation. The philosopher-strategist entered Vorlag's chambers not with an air of vindication, but with a quiet, scholarly curiosity. He found the Grand Marshal staring at the projection of the blue planet, a silent vigil he had kept since their purpose had been erased. "They have offered us a gift," Xylos said, his voice a calm anchor in the sea of Vorlag's confusion. Not just a reprieve, but a gift of knowledge. They are offering us access to their complete archives, everything. Their history, their art, their science, the entire chaotic record of their journey to transcendence. They call it the human library. Vorlag did not turn. His gaze remained fixed on the world below. Why? Why would they share their deepest secrets with an enemy who came to destroy them? Perhaps, Xylos mused, it is because they no longer see us as an enemy. They see us as younger, as a species still struggling with the same fears and insecurities they themselves overcame. They are not offering us a weapon or a secret grand marshal. They are offering us a mirror. Reluctantly, Vorlag agreed. A secure data link was established, not through Cathar technology, which the humans had gently bypassed, but through a direct, stable gravitational wave. The data began to flow. It was not a sterile, ordered archive like the Imperium's Hall of Records. It was a living, breathing torrent of information, a qualitative and quantitative history of a species in all its messy, glorious, and terrible detail. There were the symphonies of beings named Beethoven and Bach, resonating with a depth of emotion the Cathar had long since bred out of themselves. There were the equations of Einstein and Newton, elegant and beautiful in their simplicity, yet only a stepping stone to the deeper understanding of reality the humans now possessed. There were endless wars, acts of unimaginable cruelty and selfless sacrifice, often intertwined. They saw the rise and fall of empires, the birth of religions, the slow, agonizing crawl of progress. They witnessed a species that could create breathtaking works of poetry in one century and instruments of mass genocide in the next. It was the full, unedited story of chaos. Vorlag and his senior officers, along with Xylos, spent weeks immersed in the archive. They were not just seeing data. The human consciousness was guiding them, providing context, allowing them to feel the moments of history they were witnessing. They felt the terror of a soldier in a trench, the joy of a scientist making a breakthrough, the love of a mother for her child. These were the alien emotions they had so long feared, the chaos they had sought to purge from the galaxy. And here, presented as a complete story, they were not a weakness. They were a source of incredible strength, of resilience, of a capacity for change that the rigid, unchanging Cathar Imperium could not hope to match. The Cathar had achieved stability by becoming a monolith. The humans had achieved transcendence by learning to be a river, ever-changing, ever-flowing, absorbing all obstacles, and making them a part of its journey. One cycle, as they were exploring the final moments before the Great Silence, the period of humanity's ascension, Xylos detected an anomaly. It was a signal buried deep within the final layers of human data, almost perfectly shielded, almost invisible. It was not human in origin. It was older, far older, and its structure was alien to any known form of communication. "Bring it up," Vorlag commanded, his voice now carrying a new tone, not of command, but of intense curiosity. On the main screen in the briefing room, a complex waveform appeared, a signal of immense power and subtlety. The human consciousness, the entity of light, materialized before them once more, its presence now familiar, almost comforting. "You have found it," the entity communicated. "We hoped you would. It is the reason we have shared our story W." "You. What is it?" Xylos asked, his mind racing to analyze the signal's properties. "It is a warning," the human consciousness replied. "It is the great filter. The reason the galaxy appears so silent, so empty of advanced life. We discovered it only in our final moments of individuality as our collective minds began to merge and our perception of the universe deepened. It is a message from a civilization that existed in this galaxy millions of years before your species or ours even left its primordial oceans. The entity began to translate the ancient signal, its meaning flowing into their minds not as words, but as pure, terrifying concepts. The message spoke of a recurring, galactic-scale event. It was not an invasion, not a war. It was a cleansing. A wave of energy, or a silent, patient intelligence, that moved through the galaxy on a vast, cosmological cycle. It sought out and neutralized any civilization that reached a certain level of technological or conscious development, specifically, any species capable of manipulating space-time on a significant scale. It was a cosmic immune system, purging what it perceived as a potential threat to the fabric of reality itself. The civilization that sent this message was extinguished by it. The human entity continued, a note of profound sorrow echoing from its unified mind. Their final act was to embed this warning into the quantum foam, a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean of time, hoping that the next species to rise might be able to read it before it was too late. Vorlag stared at the screen, at the ancient, elegant waveform that was a ghost's final cry. He finally understood. Humanity's frantic, chaotic race for technology, their seemingly self-destructive sprint towards the singularity. It wasn't just about overcoming their own nature. It was a race against time. They had sensed the approaching threat, the great silence that waited for them, and they had gambled everything on a single, desperate strategy. To achieve a state of being that was beyond the filter's detection parameters, they had to become something other than a technological civilization. They had to become a part of the universe itself, and they had succeeded just in time. We have removed ourselves from the equation, the entity explained. As a unified, non-physical consciousness, we no longer register as a civilization in the way the filter defines it. We are background noise. But you and the other nascent powers of this galaxy, including the Cathar Imperium, you are still on the path. Your technology, your expansion, your use of hyperspace, you are painting a target on your back. A star chart materialized in the room, a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. On the far rim, a subtle, almost imperceptible distortion was visible, a ripple in the fabric of spacetime. A red line, impossibly long, showed its trajectory. It was moving slowly, patiently, but inexorably across the galaxy, and its path led directly through the heart of the Cathar Imperium. The deletion date that had saved them from their own folly now seemed like a cruel, cosmic joke. They had been spared from one act of annihilation only to be shown a far greater one, an apocalypse on a scale they could not even comprehend. Grand Marshal Vorlag looked from the star chart to the calm, luminous figure of the human entity, and then to Xylos. The rigid certainty of the warrior was gone, replaced by the heavy, humbling weight of true understanding. His entire life, his entire civilization, had been dedicated to achieving order through control, through the elimination of threats. But they had been looking in the wrong direction. They had built their fortress to protect themselves from the chaos of other life, while the true threat was a silent, cosmic order of a kind they had never imagined. It was an order that demanded silence, that culled the loud, bright flames of burgeoning consciousness. Humanity had not been a threat to be purged. They were a lesson to be learned. They had faced the ultimate fear, not with an armada, but with an evolution of the soul. "What do we do?" Vorlag asked, the question directed at no one in particular. It was the plea of a man who had just realized the universe was infinitely larger and more terrifying than his philosophy had ever allowed. The human consciousness offered no easy answer, no grand strategy. We cannot interfere directly. To do so would be to make ourselves visible once more. But we have given you the knowledge. We have shown you our history, our path. And we have given you the warning, the time you would not have otherwise had. The rest is up to you. The entity of light began to fade, its purpose fulfilled. The galaxy is not empty. It is just quiet. Perhaps together you can learn to sing a song the silence cannot overwhelm. The presence was gone. Vorlag and Xylos were left in the briefing room, the ancient warning still pulsing on the screen, the trajectory of the great filter. A death sentence written across the stars. The Cathar Armada, a fleet without a purpose, now had won. It was no longer an instrument of conquest, but the last, best hope of a civilization that had just been given a second chance. Vorlag looked at his old friend, the philosopher-strategist he had so often dismissed. The warrior and the thinker, the fist and the mind. They were both needed now. "Send a message to the Silent Council," Vorlag said, his voice imbued with a new, somber authority. "Tell them. Tell them everything. Tell them that the barbarians at the gate were not the enemy. They were the prophets, and the end of the world is coming." He then turned his gaze back to the star chart, to the slow, patient ripple of doom. The Cathar Imperium had spent millennia fearing the chaos of life. Now they had to face the terror of a perfect, silent, and all-consuming order. Their war for survival had only just begun.